Canadian Children's Book Centre presents a Biblio video webinar.
I will begin by saying hello, welcome. My name's Stephanie Wells. I'm the Executive Director at the Canadian Children's Book Centre, and it's my pleasure to host today's webinar. So welcome, everyone. Our agenda for the next hour is going to look like this. We'll begin with a land acknowledgement, followed by some simple about the Canadian Children's Book Centre and the Growing Literacy Project. Next, I'll introduce our special guests, Bev Brenna and McKee. And then following Bev and Lori's conversation, there'll be time for questions and then a quick wrap up. I'd like to begin with acknowledging that the Canadian Children's Book Centre's office is located on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Wendat peoples. This land is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit and Métis peoples, and is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. This is a treaty to share and protect this land. Lori and Bev are joining us today from Treaty 6 territories and the homeland of the Métis. We pay our respect to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of these places, and we reaffirm our relationship with one another and as stewards of the land. Please take a moment to ground yourselves with the land where you're joining us from. And now, a few housekeeping notes. Please use the Q&A feature to ask questions. We can gather those throughout, and there'll be time for them after Lori and Bev's presentation. Attendees are on mute, and the chat feature, I believe, is disabled, but we weren't quite sure. But I do ask that you put your questions through the Q&A. This webinar is being recorded, and all attendees and registrants will receive a link afterwards of the recording. Closed captioning is available. If you would like to turn it on, you can simply navigate on your navigation bar to the section that says More with the 3 dots above, and you can turn on captioning there. And now a little bit about us. The CCBC was formed in 1976, really with the belief that all Canadians should have the opportunity to read books created by authors and illustrators, and that a greater commitment to promoting these books would really lead to better and higher quality books. Almost 50 years later, we continue to follow this guiding principle, and we're recognized as a key partner in the world of Canadian children's books. We take responsibility for both safeguarding and celebrating Canadian children's books. And we envision a country where all Canadians have the opportunity to read books created by Canadian authors and illustrators that represent the diverse voices from across the country. We do this through our many programs, including Canadian Children's Book Week, just happened at the beginning of May. We have 2 publications, Best Books for Kids and Teens and Canadian Children's Book News. Those magazines come out throughout the year, and they review and sum up the best of the best and include articles as well on books in Canada. We have an awards program. We put lots of great videos out on our YouTube channel called Biblio Video, and we also participate in the TD Grade 1 book giveaway. And of course, why we're here today, the Growing Literacy Project. So this project started last fall with a generous grant from the Canada Post Community Foundation. The project really was conceived to help address loss in literacy skills in Canadian kids that we were seeing as a result from the COVID-19 pandemic. We were really fortunate to get Dr. Brenna as our project consultant to help us as we set about this work. Through a national survey, we heard from educators about what they were observing, and what they were needing help with to support students with their early literacy development. Today's webinar grew out of that direct teacher feedback. And I know we're all looking forward to hearing about the findings and then some ideas to help tackle these challenges. But of course, because we are the CCBC, we're going to try to center Canadian children's books in the conversation where we can. This project also includes several other deliverables, including creating videos and downloadable resources for teachers, all of which will be featured on our website or our YouTube channel, and they're free to everyone. The spring edition of Book News that was just published also features two of the deliverables for this project, an article by Dr. Brenna on literacy support for early readers, and a great listing of fabulous and fun Canadian alphabet books for early readers. It's called From A to Z. So make sure you check out the most recent edition of Book News for those two great teacher-focused articles. And now, without any more ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Bev Brenna. She is a freelance writer, editor, and visual artist. She's the author of 16 books, earning a Prince Honor, a Dolly Gray Award, and I'm not sure if I'm going to say this right, a Stutzner Award for Humor. Her work has also been shortlisted for Governor General's Literary Award and listed on the CBC's Young Adult Books That Make You Proud to Be Canadian list. With a background in classroom teaching and special education, Bev is a professor from the University of Saskatchewan and the current children's editor at Red Deer Press. So that's, I think I heard 4 jobs in there. Bev. Lori McKee is an associate professor at the University of Saskatchewan, where she teaches courses focused on literacies and pedagogies. Lori comes to the role of educator, having been an elementary teacher herself for 20 years, working in early elementary classrooms and providing focused reading support through reading recovery. Lori's research and publications focus on supporting pre-service and in-service teachers and in promoting the expansive literacy learning opportunities for children. So we know we're in good hands. Without any more preamble from me, I'd like to turn the conversation over to Bev and Lori. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. That was just a wonderful introduction. I'm truly honored to be involved in this project. I've been a long fan of the Canadian Children's Book Centre, and I've been a long fan of Dr. Lori McKee. So I'm bringing 2 of these great loves here together in this time we're spending together. So Lori and I have only really met in person twice. We've worked, in the same sort of circles. I've long been a fan of your research and your teaching, Lori, and the publications you've built on both of those. And so today we're just going to let her rip with some questions that have evolved out of the data from the survey that the CCBC has conducted. And we'll just get right into it by starting with, in your experience, what are some good ways to make learning to read productive and fun for emerging readers of all ages?
Well, thanks, Bev. And I'll just begin my answer by also saying I'm a big fan of yours, and I'm happy to be here. And as I'm thinking with these questions, and they're really big questions, and so I can't necessarily give a comprehensive answer for each of these questions, and also in recognition that folks on this call will have their own wonderful experiences to build on. And so I'll do my best to provide some focused, tangible tips, but also recognizing that and first acknowledging that I know and I'm confident that there's a lot of really great things going on already in classrooms, and I celebrate that good work. So this is not to say, oh, do this instead. It's more in terms of building on the good work that is already being done. And so this and all of the questions are really, really big questions. And so I'm going to do my best to focus it in a little bit, because as we talk about good ways, right? What does that mean? Because in my classroom practice, and maybe in yours, there might be a really good way for one class 1 year, and then you try something very similar the next year and it falls flat. And so just to kind of keep that in mind, that we're talking about, okay, this could work, but we always have to be situating it within our classrooms. And so when I think about how to make learning to read fun, I think I'll focus in particularly on read aloud as one practice, not the only practice, but again, for our time and for our focus here to help us rein it in. And so when I'm thinking about read aloud, one of the first things before the text even comes to the classroom, right, is that idea of text selection. So when I'm thinking about a good text to bring into the classroom, I'm going to be thinking about what are the texts that can allow my students to enter new worlds, right? How can we see new things? But at the same time, I'm also want those books to connect in some ways to the children and their life experiences. There are cultural, linguistic funds of knowledge. So there's that newness, but also that connection with who I am in this world and what I know and what I'm interested in. So that connection there. So by that funds of knowledge piece, I'm thinking specifically around my language. Who is in this book? Does it reflect my culture, my language, my cadence, my family, and finding a text that way. And further to the text selection, I'm going to also be thinking about, does this text that I'm bringing into the classroom have different entry points for students to make meaning? So by that, I mean, maybe there's a real wonderful picture that can be a pathway to engagement. Maybe there's the content of the book itself that my particular students might be connecting to. Maybe there's vocabulary that I think would be supportive to my students. So when I think of that text selection in that way, I'm trying to think through multiple pathways to engagement and to literacy learning, and how I might be able to build on that in my classroom. And then, once we have the book, then how am I going to read it? What are my ways of reading this text to this particular group of students? So for example, are we going to gather as a whole class to read this book? Do I want my students to come to a carpeted area? This is something we might think of in terms of little kids, but sometimes big kids like to do this as well, right? Or do I want my students to stay in their desks? There's sometimes students in grade 1 should not be gathering together on the carpet because it would be chaos, right? So thinking about what is going to work for gathering in my classroom. And maybe it's not a whole class. Maybe it's going to be a small group. Maybe I want to be sharing this book as a book club or a literature circle with my older students. So thinking through, okay, I have a text. How can I situate it in the life of the classroom? And then what am I going to use it for? How can I use this text to support my children's reading acquisition? So I might be thinking about, I could do a think aloud. I could be reading a text aloud and come to a word and demonstrate decoding of a particular word and make visible, okay, this is how I'm taking apart this word in text. I might demonstrate how I'm navigating a reading path. I might stop to ask questions that are comprehension focused or inference focused and make really visible how we're working through those. So yeah, like there's so many things to think of before we get to the actual reading. So Bev, I don't know if you want to chime in here. I have a little bit more on this question, but I could talk forever.
Well, I'll just chime in. I'll just say, I think it's interesting that the teachers completing the survey gave us this data, that they were really interested in knowing more about learning to read and making that productive and fun. And a lot of their responses also connected to reading aloud. And our next question kind of gets even more thoroughly into that. So you're really kind of setting the stage here, I think, for just a great discussion. I've been taking some notes, and I'm glad for our audience today that this webinar is recorded and available again, because honestly, each point you're making, I think is terrific. So do you want to just keep going? I think there's...
So, Bev, do you want me? I had a couple of concrete examples, if that would be helpful.
That'd be awesome. Yeah.
So I'll just click over here. So I wanted to also take it to that more tangible. So we've been talking big ideas, right? What we do before, how we can do it. But I also wanted to give some concrete examples of books you can use and how. And so I was thinking about how that promotion of reading development and reading acquisition, I should say, is connected to writing. And so one really concrete way it is through using those picture books. What we read is what we're going to write about. And I chose two books, not because I know the authors or anything, but because they're both available in English and French. And I wanted people to be able to see these resources. So Chester the Cat, Melanie Watt, this could be an entry point into a couple of different elements for the instruction of reading and writing. So if you know Chester and Melanie Watt, there is a strong voice. The cat has a voice, the author has a voice, and they're kind of at it, right? So I could use it to talk about voice and then have my students, try to work on their author's voice. Or I could also use the book as an entry point into revision, peer editing. There's a lot of good examples of what not to do. Chester is not the best peer editor, and that can be a way into that writing process. And so there's that moving through, like, I'm becoming a better reader, I'm becoming a better writer at the same time. So even though Chester is a pretty simple book, because it provides that entry point into revision, I've seen Chester used grade 3, grade 4, because that simplicity of content enables kids to take up the more complicated process of the writing revision. And so that would be, an idea of how to do that. The other example that I wanted to share is with Meet Viola Desmond. So this book is a wonderful picture book that also provides true content for students. So I was thinking about this as because it is a picture book, there is that aesthetic quality that helps students to enter into a real life story in Canada. And so that's going to be engaging to a particular kind of reader. The text itself is factual, but it's written more in a story form. And so that will engage a particular kind of reader. And then from that, what I could say is, like, we could link that to another text. So because Viola Desmond is from Nova Scotia, I went to the Nova Scotia Archives. And so the Nova Scotia Archives have a big inventory of Viola Desmond information. So newspaper articles, court documents, and so forth. And so these texts can support reading acquisition because they are nonfiction. They're written in a very different way. They're more efferent in their focus. The language, because of the time that they were written, is a little bit different and offers different opportunities for learning to read. So when we take those texts together, we have different opportunities to teach our students. And so I will also say that I will share these slides because they're not fancy, but I think the links for people might be really helpful as we go forward.
Oh, that was really awesome and interesting. It's lovely to even connect with these ideas of multiple entry points. So right away, I can see with Meet Viola Desmond and your connection to, local history and newspaper articles, we've already got a number of levels of text right there. Chester makes me think about a research study I did with a grade 8 boy who had a developmental disability. Chester is one of his favorite books, but he wouldn't go to the library and get it because it was in the little kids section. And so I think, making books accessible for a variety of ages in a way that's age appropriate and respectful, I think is super important. And I think these entry points and this idea of how to use literature in the way that you're helping us with really speaks to me. One other thought. No, do you have another thing you wanted to share, Lori? Another slide? Or okay. Do you want to stop screen sharing?
Sure.
Yeah, great. Funds of knowledge also really impacted me in this part of your discussion. And I was thinking about a little guy I know named Bowden, and I'm just going to show a quick picture. I think it connects to the idea of reading and writing connections as well. And so Bowden, family friend here, is very interested in snails. And we can see in this photo I have of Bowden that he's really observing this snail carefully. Because his funds of knowledge have been responded to, his interest here through reading about snails, he's developed some content knowledge. So a dictated story by Bowden might look something like this. I saw a snail. It was going in a straight line. It left a trail of slime. It was brown. And so those words don't happen by accident. Straight, slime, even color words, trail. They come from all sorts of different experiences, language experiences, and in this case, having been read to. If Bowden were to dictate those sentences, so his idea of writing might be dictating to an adult who records his speech, then he's got a great reading text, and we can do some phonics word families around that. That was just one example of my thinking when I came across this fun and productive. I thought about, what makes writing easy for kids, something that they've just said and had written down. And so thanks for letting me contribute that to this funds of knowledge idea, which I think is super important. So I'm going to flip to the next. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. And then it connects back to that, okay, now I'm dictating a text, it becomes writing, then I can read it back.
Yes, that is such an abstract idea, the idea that writing is something that somebody else has thought, and it's been written down, and now we read it. Like all of that it blows my mind how hard this is really, and how abstract, and yet kids do it, and we support them in doing it. I'm going to go to the next question here, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Okay. While many of our teachers on this survey that the CCBC has conducted reported confidence with picture book choices, a number of educators asked for advice about reading aloud to their students in grades 4 and up. I thought that was a fascinating piece of data. It wasn't something I could have predicted. And they asked how to locate good chapter books to share, along with general advice on teacher read-alouds. What advice, Laura, do you have in this regard about strategies for teachers?
Yeah, so many good places to look, right? And once you find those resources, like how do you go through and vet them, right? And so I'm going to share screen again because I thought it would be helpful for people to be able to see links about just different locations. So again, this is not going to be comprehensive for all the little hidey holes that are there for quality children's books, but different places to look. And so, before I go to the internet, I'm always going to be thinking about who are the experts in front of me and in my life. And so for me as a classroom teacher, that is the kids. The kids have great ideas about what they're interested in, who they're reading. And I'm going to be trying to connect to those interests. Teacher librarians, big shout out to teacher librarians because they are so knowledgeable about the texts in the collection, and they can also help build bridges. Well, if you like this text, maybe you like this text, right? Also, our librarians in the public libraries are helpful. Also, social media. So I have found that following authors on Instagram, Twitter, maybe TikTok, I haven't gone there yet, but maybe it might be a way, because what it does in that way, if we follow authors that our kids like, they're apt to give a little shout out about a book that they're releasing, and it's a manageable kind of information, right? So because it's one source at a time. Authors' websites also very helpful and often have information around activities that people can do with their books. So I would also connect with that. Also, like the Canadian Review of Materials, this is something that can be really helpful because it's not like 40 books at a time. It's periodic, and they're released, a couple at a time. So it would be a way of staying abreast of the books that are coming out. So a little bit more manageable. I like award lists. Why? Because if they're on an award list, these books are on an award list, then maybe there's something good about it. And so I still need to do the work of reading those books and seeing how they fit with my class. But it's a way of filtering down, because if I go to Chapters, or a bookstore, I can't spend all day reading all of the books. I mean, I would like to, but I can't, right? So that would be a way. There's also, you can see a hyperlink there to it's a book award list that happens to be housed on the library website at University of Saskatchewan. You don't have to have a library card at the University of Saskatchewan to access this, but something that would be very like just a way of helping us go down. So at the top of the screen, you can see that I've shown two different examples of provincial reading programs that are out there. So Silver Birch is from Ontario. It's the whole forest of reading. And for those of you who are familiar, there are different trees that represent different ages, nonfiction and fiction, and different provinces have different programs that are kind of in tune with this kind of idea. And so that is a way of engaging with current books that are being released. And so you can just go to the website and see the books, or another avenue of engagement there would be to participate with your class, with your school board in voting for the winners there. So Chocolate Lily is one from BC, similar kind of a program. So I have another slide here, Bev. I have three.
Okay.
Bev and I said we would have no problem talking, and that is the case. I also wanted to highlight, in connection with the Forest of Reading particularly, it's just one that I'm familiar with, having taught in Ontario. The Forest of Reading website itself is very helpful because you can go to the current 2024 books, but you can go into the archives as well and get like the last 5 years and see what's there. But there are also kind of companion resources that are off the forest floor, like they're through so this is an example from a website, and this was created during the pandemic, where teachers were trying to get out information to their students using high quality children's literature, but also associated activities that they could access electronically. And so this website here is from Peel School Board in Ontario, and you can filter it by age. And there's a person reading aloud the book, as well as companion activities that you can connect. And they do it in a Google slide format. So it's one page that can be used. And then I have one more on this. So this is a resource that is specifically focused on locating books on Indigenous themes and by Indigenous authors. So this is from the University of Calgary, but again, you don't need to be a student of higher education to have access to this. It's open. And you can see on the left, there are different filters that are there. You can filter by age, by type of resource. So here I've shown an example of filtering for grades 4 to 6 in a graphic novel comic format, and the items that are returned. So depending on how you set the filters, there are also lesson plans that can provide you with a launch into these resources as well. So lots of different places to look that can be overwhelming. So I would say maybe not all of them at the same time, but to be picking up on, well, how can, where can I look? And maybe sticking with that and then spending the time to say, circling back to the first question, why is this going to be engaging with my students? How am I going to use it? And to what end? Why am I using this to support my students?
Oh, just beautiful ideas. I'm just pretty much levitating off my chair here with all of these, just my favorite subject matter. You're talking about the Tree Awards, and I've had the good fortune to attend some of those awards across Canada, provinces, territories, and it's really like a rock star environment. People are like cheering for these writers and, trying to get their own book ahead. And it's kids that are, doing the voting and engaged. And I just absolutely loved it. So thanks so much for mentioning that. I'm just going to do a quick screen share with just a couple of book titles that I enjoyed reading aloud, and just really highlighting the things you're saying about, choosing things that you like, that your kids will like. I also tend to look for things that I just can read okay aloud, and some materials are easier than others for that oral reading. For me, I look for short chapters. So Sarah Cassidy's A Boy Named Queen has beautiful chapters to read aloud that, leave you on a hanging point where the kids say, please, please, one more. Stand on the Sky, Fatty Legs. These are just titles I've had great experiences reading, enjoying them myself, and also seeing my students enjoy them too. Part of that, though, I think is really to be continuing to evaluate. So often we may start a book with our students and decide that nobody likes it. And it's okay to talk about that, and it's okay to stop reading it. And I think that models something really important about the Reading Act that can, lead over into all sorts of digital media. If we're watching a film that frightens us, we can turn the other way, we can leave the room, we can turn it off. And same with books. And I think when I was a child, the teacher chose something and we had to like it. There was no option even to imagine us not liking it. And that's not really what real readers do. So I just wanted to think about that too with you. One of the things you're really highlighting here is Canadian content.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think maybe it'd be really valuable to talk a little more about that with our third question, which is, can you summarize for us a little further? Why are Canadian materials important in the hands of Canadian kids? And after you speak, Laurie, I'll maybe go back to Stephanie, because I think I'd like her to weigh in on this as well.
Perfect. Yeah, so much, right? It is so important for Canadian kids to see Canada represented in the text that we read. And I think we have this identity as Canadians, and there's things that are particular to us, that we have particular spellings of words. We have particular cultural identities. We have different language uses. And so that is true maybe when we're comparing Canada versus the United States. But within Canada, we also have diversity. And so I think that, yes, Canadian and also regional to us is also really important, and helping our students to see that this text is situated within this smaller context that is under that umbrella of what it means to be Canada. So within Canada, I'll share just a little example. We know that there's going to be regional differences. So about a year ago, I moved from Nova Scotia to Saskatchewan. And I can tell you that language is used differently here. And my students will tell you that I still talk Nova Scotia a little bit, but I'm getting better. And so there's just different pronunciations. There's different value and of words. They hold a different weight to people. And so it has an impact for us in our teaching, because if I'm taking a book, say that is written in Nova Scotia, and I'm bringing it to Saskatchewan, I am going to need to give a little bit more background, because there might be images there that aren't fully understood. There might be language that has a different meaning. When I was in Nova Scotia, the kids there knew a lot about tides. In Saskatchewan, not as much, which makes sense, right? But it means that when we're bringing together the kids with a text, that the teacher needs to be thinking about, well, how am I a mediator in this? How can I be a bridge to the meaning that is there? So related to the book that I showed earlier about Viola Desmond. So I lived about 40 minutes from where Viola and the movie theater incident took place. So funds of knowledge, students knew about this. They knew where the theater was located. If you walked down the street, you could see images of this. And so my entry point into that text would be quite different than if I were on the prairies. So that's kind of one example of regional differences. But then in thinking of Canada, right, there continues to be that, okay, Viola, we know her, she's on our money, right? So all kids will have a connection to her. So there can be that belonging to a country and a region, and it's enacted, through language uses, the images, the content. And so I think that gives us a sense of identities as Canadians. So I did want to I'll share one more slide specifically around that, thinking of Canada as, the country and in the importance of sharing Canadian. But I also wanted to highlight the importance of that regionality also within the greater context of Canada. And one of those things comes through our uses of Indigenous themed content by authors and just the content of these books. So we know that that it is so important to include a diversity of texts, for example, highlighting Indigenous authors. But what we don't want to do is paint this picture of Indigenous people in Canada, right? It's Indigenous peoples. And so when sharing books with our students from Indigenous authors, again, it's about locating, right? It's showing that there is diversity, celebrating the diversity, locating Indigenous peoples in their place. And so one way of doing that, this is just an example of a recent book by Monique Graysmith. And so this is a dual language identity text written in English and Cree. And so this is a way of, hey, where's Monique Graysmith? She speaks Cree. This is what Cree looks like. This is what it looks like in English, and showing our students that when we're talking about Indigenous culture, it's not singular, but plural.
Important point, Laurie. Thank you so much for making that. I'm thinking about a doctoral dissertation by Anne Murray Orr, which I think it's called Stories to Live By. And in it, Anne was a researcher observing a child in a grade 2 classroom that wasn't contributing, wasn't communicating, just really wasn't participating. And the teacher said, oh, don't worry about her. She won't participate. But Anne brought in a book by Rachna Gilmore called Gift for Gita. And this little girl recognized her own East Indian family in that book and started talking and contributing. And when Anne said, what was it about this book that made you want to, contribute? This little girl said, I've never seen myself at school before.
Mhm.
And that just brings tears to my eyes, thinking about it, thinking about a child in a school that doesn't see themselves. And I love what you're saying about bringing diversity in and helping all children see themselves, because how important that is. Stephanie, I'll bring you into this conversation, if I may, on Canadian content.
Yeah, for sure. I love the example you just gave, because I've just been reading a lot of teacher feedback forms from our grade 1 book giveaway. And last year the book was called Chaiwala, and it was about a little girl and her mother taking a train and getting a cup of chai, which we call in Canada chai tea, but the real name's just chai. And I had so many great feedback forms saying about how the teachers really use that as an opportunity. Some where they had kids in their class that connected to it, but some where they had no kids that had any experience, and they used it as an opportunity to bring in chai tea and introduce it to the kids and talk about what this is to the culture. So really adding that context, Lori, that you talked about. And it was just a great example of how different teachers across the country with different mix of kids in their classes had those different entry points into that book, which I love. To answer the question of why is it important to have Canadian reading materials too, the main thing that comes to my mind as well is just that if our kids in Canada hear and see stories, all the different diverse stories across the country by authors and illustrators that we're talking about, these are Canadian, they're from here, they're from there, it really validates to Canadian kids that their stories are important too, right? There are Canadian authors, there are authors down the road, there are illustrators that grew up in the town, three towns over. So it really lets them understand that their stories, their art, their vision, it's all important, and there's a place for it. And so to me, that is super important as well, just in sparking young imaginations and getting to stories told. And then of course, I think too, Laura, you really touched on this, but that piece about really, we have such an incredibly diverse communities, Indigenous, First Nations, First Peoples, newcomers, multi-generational Canadians, like so many different stories that we really, we can see ourselves in the stories, but we can also use those as understanding other cultures right within Canada, which is beautiful.
Love that. Love those points. I think about our industry in Canada is pretty young in terms of Canadian children's literature. We really didn't have Canadian kids' books till the 1970s. And so we're still making sure that there's a place for writers, illustrators here in this country. And I can think of some of my worst teaching experiences ignoring that. I can think of a girl I was working with in grade 6 who was a struggling reader, and I assigned her Black Beauty. I did everything wrong. It was an early year of my teaching, and I did everything wrong. I assigned her Chapters of Black Beauty, which is not a Canadian book. It's a classic, but not Canadian, to go home and read it aloud every night. So putting pressure on the oral reading, which is extra hard because you can't sort of problem solve in the same way as you do when you're sound reading. Long sentences. I don't know if any of us have looked at Black Beauty lately, but long sentences, long chapters, hard vocabulary, archaic vocabulary, syntax, the grammar is difficult. So in every way, I created an experience for her that made it harder to read. And so it didn't continue forever. We didn't finish that book, and I quickly, moved to something else. But I think about how much better we can do, and I think Canadian content will help us do that. We had a question about the adaptive dimension, Laurie, and we've kind of covered some of that with the open many access points. Is there anything that you'd like to add kind of additionally to that?
I think, yeah, it is about the different access points. And so when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking about, what James Britton said in the 80s, reading and writing float on a sea of talk. And so I think that when we're thinking through different pathways, but also different modalities, so when I'm reading something, I have opportunities to talk, I have opportunities to write. The different pathways can be enabling to particular students. As we read aloud, we can invite students to chime in with us. There's different books that just naturally invite that chiming in. And in that way, our students have opportunities to enter into that text with more support. So they're not on their own reading it aloud, but chiming in with other more capable, potentially more capable language users can create that access. And I love that example that you gave of Bowdoin of the dictated story, right? This could also be a way of supporting students within that adaptive dimension. There's so many, I mean, it's a huge question, right? But
the data that came to us from teachers, I'm celebrating all of these good questions. I think we're doing pretty well. We want to do better. I'm sure people listening today are nodding and, agreeing with a lot of what we're saying, but hopefully there's some new things happening in their environments that we'll hear about another day. And so by working together, I think we can keep on keeping on, as my grandmother would say. One last question here. We're almost, I think, to the point of taking some questions from the Q&A. And it's another common ask from the survey responses, and it's connections between home and school. And I know, Laura, you've done a lot of background work around that. Do you want to address that last question for us today?
Sure. So I think one of the things that we need to think about as teachers is how we are positioning ourselves and how we are positioning families. And so when I started teaching, there were all kinds of programs, right, where it was, okay, if we go to Pizza Hut and we get these reading logs and we can send the kids this home with the kids, and we're telling parents that you need to read this many pages and then we'll sign off on it. And then, but if you don't do it, then we won't get a pizza party. Like these kinds of practices are not always supportive to our families. And so I think that thinking past the reading log and opening opportunities for parents to showcase what they know about their child in relation to reading can be so important. And so maybe it's about an interest survey, sending home to parents. What do you notice about your child? What do they like to read at home? Like maybe they're reading the cereal box. Like this is very important information if kids are engaging in that way, because it's a different kind of text forms. What are your children's strengths? And where do you see them working? That could be a more egalitarian way of engaging parents rather than, I am sending this home, you need to have it in by tomorrow or we don't get pizza, right? Which is extreme, but I mean, this is truly how it was when I began my practice.
Yeah, I think that's super important. And it reminds me of how the family has a great fund of knowledge about their child, and to be able to access that through, if it's an interest inventory that we get off Google and we adapt, or we have it as part of our educational plan. Finding out that Bowdoin likes snails and knows a lot about them, and all of those things that families know that schools may not know until we ask. So I really like how you lead us into that. Do we have some questions to field here, Stephanie, yet, or shall I just carry on? Because I also have more questions.
There are a couple, and I'll answer those, but there's not a lot. Lori, quickly, when we look back to when you were talking about that great University of Calgary resource that had the Indigenous books, someone was wondering if it also lists books that are in French.
I'm not sure because I haven't looked. It wouldn't surprise me though. I would play around with it on the filters. And some of these books are available in multiple formats. So for example, like the mini Grace Smith would come up on that resource list, but that book is available in English and French, English and Plains Cree. So there might be different formats around that. Yeah. So I can't confidently say, but I think there probably would be resources there.
Perfect. And then I'll just also mention that somebody let us know in the webinar chat that the Quebec Ministry of Education has created a bilingual resource, and they've plopped the link into the webinar chat. So for whoever asked that question, just so you know, there's another one with French books identified in the chat. The next question actually, I think really is for myself and maybe Bev, but someone was asking, are the results of the survey going to be gathered in some kind of resource list for educators to access? So I don't know that we're going to publish a list, but what we are going to do is look at some of the questions that we haven't got to today, some of the outstanding questions, and we'll add some resources on the website, the CCBC, so it's bookcenter.ca. And we'll address some of the questions sort of like in a Q&A type format afterwards when we have some time to do that. So we will be still building out some of the answers and helping educators who took the time to participate in that survey to get to things you were looking for sure. And
great.
That's all the questions for now.
Okay, so I'm
Ev,
going
if
to
you want
carry
to keep
on.
going.
Yeah, I'm ready. So we were talking about the adaptive dimension, and Laurie was talking about sort of the pressure that we sometimes inadvertently put on families or children, and it kind of started making me think about another experience in my early classroom. This would be in about 1984. And I had a little guy just put his head down at his desk and burst into tears. And I was like, oh, like, tell me what's going on here. And the other kids went out, and I just chatted with him. And it was over a resource center I had in the classroom, a fun center. And this child had some reading materials to finish before he could get to the center. And day after day went by and he wasn't getting to the center. So if you talk about putting pressure on an experience, I was really digging away at, the struggle that he was having and putting more pressure on him. And I'm thinking about swimming, and if we kept people on the side of the pool doing exercises, or if we told them that they were less, proficient than another swimmer, how many of us would want to swim? And I wish I could go back and do a lot of those early months in my classrooms again. Do you want to address any of those thoughts, Laurie, or where do we want to go here?
Yeah, like I would say, we certainly do learn in practice and learn from our students, and who I was as a teacher 25 years ago is not who I am today, thank goodness, right? But as we take up these experiences, I think they can really help to inform what we do. And so just related to the question about families, it's what I hear about that as well is, oh, we can't do that. We can't ask parents to be involved. They're too busy. And so I'll share just a little story from my classroom when I was teaching grade 1, and it was Diwali, and I was reading a text to the students, and I was talking about this. This was not my culture. I had tried to do my best to learn about this, but when I started to read the text, one of the little girls her family was from India, she started to cry. And I was so into reading this book, I didn't even notice, right? And so kids are like, hey, she's crying, she's crying. And I said, well, what's wrong? Why are you crying? I'm reading this book for you, because I knew that she celebrated Diwali. And she said to me, are you an Indian like me? And in that moment, I really stopped and thought, okay, I did not realize the power or the potential power that this read aloud had, and I tried to work through that. But this story went home to this little girl's family as well as the families of others. And the next day I had parents coming to talk to me, hey, we heard what happened about Diwali in the class and this kind of thing. And so we had a great conversation with the parents of my class. But what came from that is parents saying, and the parent of this child saying, I'll come and talk to you about Diwali. I will come and do this. I would never have asked the parents to do that because my assumption was this is a working parent. They have a little one at home. The childcare is going to be an issue for them. And here it was that when I stopped, when there was this moment in the classroom, it opened up this possibility. And so what I would encourage people to do, especially thinking about parent engagement, is to try and invite. And it may not work because the realities are that we may not be able to have parents come into the classroom in that way, but maybe there would be something that would be a meaningful way for parents to engage. Maybe it's a video message, maybe it's something like this. But I know in my own practice, I have been guilty of, no, that won't ever work, right? When actually it did, I just had to be open to the possibilities of ways it could work.
Wow, I love that. Evolution of practice. And teachers listening today, I know that you're doing a wonderful job. You're really making a difference. And I want to hear someday from all of you in some way about that and learn from you as hopefully you might be learning something here from us. Evolution of practice, books have evolved over time, and Canadian children's literature has changed from the time it sort of began in Canada in the 70s to now. I can think of some ways it's changed, but Stephanie, maybe can I ask you to weigh in on this too, and then Laurie after that?
Yeah, so many ways. I think your example, Laurie, of Chester is a great example of how books have changed. If people are familiar with that book, it's cartoony. Chester's a bit snarky. It doesn't follow a linear narrative. There's to and fro with the character and the author. So I think, in the last 10, 20 years, the structure of books even have changed, and there's so much more freedom now to play with traditional structures and really take it out of the box. Some of that, I think, really lends itself well to nonfiction too. The way nonfiction has really changed. I think there's a wonderful acknowledgement that all reading is valuable, and now we have this incredible celebration of amazing graphic novels that would have 20 years ago never been on a curriculum, but are so great. Like there's tons of historical as well as narrative graphic novels, and I think those grew at the time when we were really looking at low boy engagement. But of course, once we started graphic novels, we realized there was a huge interest in them in all students. So that to me was great. And then I think just too, the variety of voices that we now are seeing published, the diversity of experiences, the really reflective of what Canada looks like today, who's living here, whose voices are being heard. I think there's a lot of care being taken that we're making sure we're including all voices in Canadian publishing, and certainly in the work that the Book Centre does. I think in the work that most teachers are doing. So it's wonderful, right? It really we've learned so much more too about what kids are dealing with. So we know that there's a lot of anxiety since the pandemic, and now we're seeing a whole bunch of great books that are dealing with social emotional well-being in ways that wouldn't have ever been brought up before, right? We're not just in the narrative, we're about experiences. So
really important. So changing forms and formats, changing perspectives, changing boundaries. Eliza just saying has a theory about that. On my website, www.beverlybrenna.com, there's an archives tab. In that archives, you'll see some of my own research around graphic novels. And one thing I found was that we need to take parents with us, that if we're using graphic novels in schools, parents may not really understand what graphic novels are. Are they violent? Or, and we need to help them understand that they're all genres and that they can be age appropriate, and bring parents along with us on that journey. Lori, do you have something to kind of conclude with here around?
Well, I was just going to
children's
throw
books?
it back to you because of our time, but also because I feel like I've talked a lot. More to say, but I know that you are the expert when it comes to the Canadian children's literature for sure.
Well, I think, we've covered a lot of ground here today. We appreciate the questions that came out of this data. We just love having this topic brought to us. I've had the best time in my life ever talking to you both about my favorite subject here. And I just wish everyone well in the journey forward that we're all taking together.
Thank you. And I'll just end up with a really big thank you to you both and to everybody that joined us today. It was insightful, it was useful, it was good fun. And I'll just remind teachers that are joining us today that the Canadian Children's Book Centre has a ton of resources that can help teachers. Book Centre, everything we do is free. And going to continue releasing resources, particularly around the growing literacy project as well. So thank you all very much.
My pleasure to
My
be
pleasure.
here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.